Chapter 2. Thawing Ground. Evening settled like mist through leafless branches, bringing with it the bone-deep cold that only January delivered. Clara's legs ached from the afternoon at the church food collection, hours spent sorting donations and losing herself in the measure of service. Back in her kitchen, bundled in a thick woolen cardigan, the fatigue of the day sank into her skin as she stirred a pot of vegetable barley soup simmering on the stove. The spoon clicked against the side as she mixed the rich broth, the scent of onions and carrots wafting through the room. The morning's failed attempt to connect with Nathan still stung. She touched the pocket of her apron where she'd tucked away the photograph she'd shown him earlier, the one of them in happier days. He'd brought it back from the workshop and set it on the counter, yet she refused to give up. Maybe it was Eleanor's encouraging words, or the Reverend's affirmation of conviction. Whatever the reason, she went about preparing the table, an unpretentious, deliberate act. She pulled out the mismatched china from the cupboard, the floral patterns dulled yet lovely in their fashion. She arranged the silverware, tarnished but polished, beside each plate. The heavy linen napkins, folded neatly, rested by the bowls. When Nathan came in well after sunset, Clara's heart leaped with cautious hope. He filled the doorway with his broad shoulders. Even with tiny wood grains peppering his hair, he was striking in that reserved, handsome way, exactly as he was at the church social 15 years earlier. She patted her hair self-consciously, beginning to gray early as her mother's had, and adjusted her apron over the flat plane of her stomach, a gesture from years of wondering and waiting. Dr. Campbell, the only doctor in the village, had done what he could, including sending her and Nathan to a specialist in the city whose fee had cost them 3 months of savings. He would reassure her during her monthly visits by saying, "You can't rush these things." Yet she'd seen how Nathan blamed himself for their empty nursery, viewing each passing year as an additional failure. Nathan hesitated before hanging his coat and taking his place at the table. The kerosene flame from the lamp reflected the strong planes of his face, softening the lines that worry had etched. "I hoped we could eat together," Clara said, placing a bowl before him. Steam rose from the hearty soup, carrying with it remembrances of countless evenings shared in this very kitchen. He nodded, his face unreadable in the deepening darkness. She turned up the lamp's flame, the light spreading like honey across the floorboards. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Nathan bowed his head. He'd always said grace, exactly as his father had before him. Tonight, his prayer was brief, a soldier's thanks rather than the flowing gratitude he'd once offered. Clara whispered her own amen, inserting a silent plea of her own. "Keep us warm this winter, and grant me the strength to do my part." "The food collection went well today," she began. "We stocked the entire pantry. Eleanor says it's the most donations they've ever received." Nathan stirred his soup, the spoon scraping against the bowl. "That's good." "We stored half the donations in Thomas's new display cabinet." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth, grace slipping through her fingers like water. Nathan's posture became a rigid line. A practical piece for practical use. "Several women said he has more orders than he can manage. Maybe—" "I don't need my younger brother's charity or his pity." "His is not pity. He learned everything from you. I've heard him say that no one can match your eye for grain patterns, how you made wood speak. While I was chasing perfection, Thomas was clever enough to give people what they needed, not what I believed they wanted. Plain, solid furniture that sells." Thomas had stayed realistic, establishing steady success, while Nathan had reached for something higher and fallen. Now, pride prevented the brothers from uniting, and every piece Thomas produced was another wall between them. Also, the Mitchells brought in a cherrywood bureau donated from your brother. It was lovely. She wavered. Obviously not as fine as yours. Nathan's hand paused, his eyes slipping shut for a fleeting second. Despite our differences, Thomas has a good heart. So do you. He set his spoon down. The lamplight bounced off the silver threading through his dark hair. When had that appeared? Had she been so consumed in her own sadness at their misfortune, at never having a child, that she'd missed watching her husband age? Do you recall our first winter after we got married? She asked, desperate to maintain this fragile moment of connection. The snowstorm that stranded us in your parents' cabin? Light crept into his dark eyes, a spark of remembrance. 3 days snowed in, burning through all the firewood. Fortunately, we had each other, Clara said, encouraged by this tiny crack in his armor. You built a makeshift sled from ancient boards and rope, while you insisted on racing down the steep slope behind the cabin. He added a ghost of a smile, even after the kerosene lamp ran dry. You sprained your ankle on the last run. Worth it, he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself, gazing down at his calloused hands. Clara's heart squeezed. For a moment, a mere moment, she detected her old Nathan in those words. The man who had often looked at her as if she was his personal miracle. We laughed so easily then, she said. He reclined in the wooden chair, its creak cutting through the evening quiet. That was before, when we were younger. Assumed we could live on the wishes and fresh air. The word before landed as heavily as a stone. Before the nursery that would forever sit vacant. Before the grief that had carved them into strangers. And Thomas, she pressed. Thomas understands not to chase fantasies. He's building what sells, not what sings, Clara finished. Remember the first cradle you crafted before we knew? She stopped, her hand unconsciously going to her waist. Cherry wood with maple inlay. I spent weeks getting those dovetail joints perfect. The cradle was beautiful. Too beautiful to sell, you said. We kept it in the spare room until I got overly ambitious, and we moved it to the attic. I supposed I could make pieces that would put Evergreen Hollow on the map. Nathan's voice lost its edge, the statements trailing off as if he'd spoken them too many times. That dining room suite for the Bradfords' Beacon Hill residence, custom mahogany ordered special from Chicago, Governor Bradford and his fancy Boston connections, 6 months of work. And in the end? Hardly your fault, Nathan. The wood was defective beneath the flawless surface. No one could have known. He shook his head. The wood had been properly dried. I tested the moisture content before using it. The entire village witnessed me standing there while Mrs. Catherine Bradford pointed out every flaw, right there at the Ladies' Aid Society tea. Thomas was correct. Stick to simple pieces, local wood. Don't reach beyond your station. Nathan pushed back his chair and stood. At least my brother gained from my mistakes. Plain cabinets do better than dreams. She thought of that cradle, wrapped in their attic near the doll, waiting for a miracle that never came. Perhaps that was when the fracture in the marriage had started, the baby they had desperately prayed for, then Nathan striving too high, wanting too much. The failed commission had been the final blow. I should head back to work, he said, reaching for his coat. It's dark, Clara protested, gesturing at the window where night pressed against the glass. Surely anything you're working on can wait until morning. His hand rested on the doorframe. The Hendersons commissioned an additional order. Another order? Yes. What else? His silence told her all she needed to know. A cradle. Of course, it was a cradle. Occasionally, God's sense of timing felt like a test of faith. She pulled in a breath. "Nathan," she called as he reached for the latch. "Thank you." He turned slightly. "For what?" "For taking the time to have dinner with me." He nodded, a jerky movement that spoke of discomfort. He trudged to the workshop, his footprints slicing a dark path through the snow. In the moonlight, the impression of the snow angel's wings spread wide and hopeful, not like the cramped, cautious person Clara had become. When she was younger, she'd tumbled into snowdrifts with such abandon, before disappointment had taught her restraint. Earlier at the church's fellowship hall, Thomas's 4 children had burst in with glee, his wife, Josephine, bouncing their 6-month-old baby on her knee. 3 boys and a girl, Michael, David, James, and Anne, each with Thomas's dark eyes and Josephine's golden curls. Little James had presented his father with a wooden top he'd carved, and Thomas had smiled broadly, reminding Clara of how Nathan's smile once was. Shaking off the remembrance, she cleared the table. Then she sank into a wing chair, a rose-colored damask, the arms burnished by the prayers and worries of 3 generations of Whitmore women. The parlor's accustomed comforts surrounded her, sepia photographs in gilded frames, the curved legs of the marble-topped side table Nathan had made during their courtship, and the Nottingham lace curtains that had been her mother's special gift, changed to butter yellow with age. At last, Clara allowed the tears to flow. As she grabbed her Bible, the flames from the fireplace became blurred. The leather binding had cracked at the spine, connected with the meticulous stitches she'd sewn one lonely evening. The pages fell open to a familiar passage in Psalms, the paper tissue-thin where she had sought solace. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Below, in her mother's faded pencil marks, was the date of Clara's baptism, and later, in Clara's own careful hand, the day she and Nathan were married. So much had changed since then. Before her woman troubles had grown worse, she'd helped regularly at the schoolhouse. Now, Miss Patterson only called on Clara's better days, when the younger children needed extra help with their letters. The bleeding left Clara weak and bedbound too often, and Dr. Campbell's iron tonics provided little relief. The housewives were kind as to not mention it aloud when she sent word she couldn't attend church. However, she realized they gossiped about barrenness being God's will. The scrape of the front gate broke her musings. Wiping her eyes, Clara rose as Eleanor Clemens stepped onto the porch, a still warm apple-brown Betty in her well-seasoned cast iron. Eleanor had never married, choosing to tend to her aging parents until their passing, and she served as the village's unofficial keeper of sorrows, appearing whenever someone needed comfort delivered in a covered pot. "I assumed you might enjoy a friend's company tonight," Eleanor said, stamping snow from her boots. She took in Clara's tear-stained face. "And it seems I was right." Clara tried to smile, though it crumbled like wet paper. Eleanor set the pot on the kitchen table and enveloped her friend in a fierce hug. "Put the kettle on. The best prayers start with tea and truth-telling." As Clara prepared the tea, Eleanor moved around the kitchen with the familiarity of years of friendship, gathering cups and saucers, slicing the last of the morning's bread. "I saw Nathan in his workshop," Eleanor remarked, arranging the cups on a tray. "Is that where he spends most evenings?" Clara nodded, measuring tea leaves. "It's easier for him there, I think. Wood demands nothing of him, needs nothing from him." "Unlike wives?" "Unlike memories." Clara carried the tray to the fireside table in the parlor. "He's building a cradle for the Hendersons." Eleanor's features shifted from curiosity to compassion as she peeked at Clara's waist. "Oh, Clara!" I should be happy for them, Clara said, sinking into the armchair. They've waited so long for their miracle. But all I can think is, she broke off, pressing her fingers to her lips. That it should have been yours? Eleanor squeezed her arm. You're not wrong, honey. God can hold both your joy for them and your grief for yourself. Clara stared into the dwindling flames of the fire. A log split and sent a shower of sparks. The parlor's heavy curtains were drawn. Still, a draft pushed through, causing the kerosene lamp to flicker. I want my husband back, Eleanor. The man who once built a sled just to hear me laugh. How do you find your way back to someone who's directly in front of you, but feels a million miles away? Eleanor was quiet, stirring honey into her tea with a silver spoon, Clara's wedding silver, saved for company. You know what my grandmother used to say about gardens in winter? Clara shook her head. The hardest work happens underground, where no one can see it. All that frozen earth looks dead on the surface. Underneath, roots are growing deeper, gathering strength for spring. Eleanor focused on Clara. That's where you and Nathan are, in the underground season. What if spring never comes? Spring will come. That's God's promise. Eleanor smiled. I've known you a long time. Going by what I witnessed at the food drive, in the snow angel in your garden, you've got lots of fight left in you. You recognize my angel? Of course, and it's not the effort of someone who's lost faith in miracles. Clara glanced out to where her snow angel stood. Beyond, in his workshop, a single lamp burned, casting Nathan's outline against the frost-covered glass. No, she said. I haven't given up. Except I'm unsure how to help him understand that the miracles we prayed for aren't the end of our story. Nathan emerged from the workshop, the building he'd raised with such optimism, determined to carry on the Whitmore tradition of creating furniture. For several seconds, he studied the angel. Slowly, he knelt, his hand hovering over one wing as if afraid to touch it. Clara's heartbeat ceased, then resumed with a painful thud. She glanced at the silver frame on the mantel, their wedding photograph, when Nathan's smile was effortless and her eyes sparkled with tomorrow's possibilities. Look! Eleanor followed Clara's gaze. Once in a while, spring starts with the first warm day. Nathan stood, brushing snow from his knees. As he walked toward the house, his steps were slower, like a man tracing tracks he'd almost forgotten. The porch steps creaked their recognizable welcome. And for tonight, that was enough.